giving you a voice.
Making it loud our own way.
Welcome to the fun.
We need your help to keep fun loud, live, and independent. For just $1, you can be our boss at patreon.com/funfrc. Pledge your support in September and you'll be eligible to win a Cooler Master MS-120 keyboard and mouse set.
We spent a lot of time talking about defense on this show and the importance of defense. And so I think what's kind of interesting is that, like, how do you, like, as a drive coach, Mason, for example, how do you teach your drivers to play D?
How do we teach them to play defense? I mean, a lot of it comes down to positional play, understanding that, often it comes down to we want someone on the field. We want them driving like this whenever the robot that they're trying to defend is coming up this way, right? It's so important that you be able to adjust, because if they go left, you can go like this and blocks them out and put them in the corner. If they go like this, you can pull them out that way. And if they get past you and they're starting to get around, bam, T-boned, got you, buddy, right? So, that's key number one. And there were so many times where I have to give this, let me teach you how to play defense over lunch break before we start our elimination playoffs. We're gonna show you a line on the field, and we want you to stay glued to that line. And you mentioned earlier, you hit the nail on the head. You have to teach people to be patient and wait for that robot to come to them that they're trying to defend, and not to chase them. It's textbook bad defense whenever I see someone chasing another robot around the field. Whenever, I was training my drivers, it was always a joy to get stuck in a match where somebody was just chasing us. We could just tell our drivers to stay in motion, just stay fast, get to your safe zones, and you'll be fine. And that would happen most of the time. It was the ones you had to worry about where they would play positional and you had to try to do trick moves or J hooks or something to get around them. And that made it a lot harder.
Yeah, I'd say for any teams out there who want to think about defense in any given game, the best type of defense in terms of what's easy to do and what can be effective and what can avoid penalties is to find somewhere where you can play positional defense that isn't adjacent to a protected zone. That way you can go and park there. And if you get pushed, you're not going to be pushed into the zone. And so it's trying to identify those points. Game design's gotten better. There aren't a lot of those on the field necessarily anymore, but if there is one, that's the best. I think if you look at the 2014 game, for example, since there were no protected zones really in that scoring area, if you knew, like, for example, there's a lot of teams who love to score right in front of the logo. So you could just get in that position. And then if you're patient and you stay there and you're willing to stay there, you can really make an impact on them. So that's one of the things. It's identifying the positions where you can play effective positional defense. I've never been the biggest fan of pushing defense. I mean, like, sometimes it's nice to play the game of trying to hit people on the corners, try and spin them, especially teams who are using omni wheels. But for the most part, I'm a big fan of positional defense, of getting in the way and you becoming the immovable object.
Yeah, something both of you mentioned as well for training drivers that I want to expand on. It's the referee and me, right? It's just making sure, especially your defensive drivers, know those rules. I've spent many a lunch break before elims sitting down with my alliance partners and be like, okay, you're going to be our defense spot. Here are the rules you need to know. Here's what's going to happen if you break those rules. Things like that. And it's just, I did the same thing when I was training drivers. I always tested them. They had to know the rules before they were allowed to drive. And all that. And so that's just such a huge part of defense that people forget about, is not scoring for your opponent while you're playing defense by getting a bunch of fouls.
We've got some good questions here in chat from one of our longtime friends, longtime subscriber, Caltran2410. This question's for you, Mason. How much did 118 find that their pivot piston helped them in 2014?
Yeah, so we had we called them drop-down omnis. I think the kids called them swag wheels. They were a cheap way to add some extra mobility to get out of T-bones. I mean, they were all about T-bones. What we found was that they were a lot of fun. Everyone loved driving with them, but they didn't work great. They didn't work as good as desired. The omnis were a little bit too small. We use these like tiny 1.5-inch omnis, and they dug into the carpet a little bit too much. So they weren't totally free spinning, and they weren't powered. So you could quickly lose all the momentum in the robot. So if you had some fast action moves, you could do some sweet 180 J hooks. And that was really cool. It got us out of some tricky T-bones, but it definitely didn't work as good as I would have hoped. I would make the omnis bigger and power them next time.
Yeah, and a question that's kind of playing off of that from Brennan 4476. What were 118's thoughts on their 2014 off-season drivetrain modifications?
Yeah, so we did just what I was talking about. We put in a bigger wheel. We made it powered off of a cool bevel gear interface. So it was always spinning, and it was 90 degrees perpendicular to the other wheels. And that was pretty sweet. It took a lot of hardware. It took a lot of space on the robot, which would make it a pretty big design trade-off. But we could spin around like nobody's business with that. With that single powered drop down Omni that was perpendicular. It was a 4-inch one. And what I loved about it is in one of the off-season events at like Texas Robot Roundup or something, the driver was so excited he just started spinning around and he was able to tip the robot over. So you could get some real angular inertia going with it. So that was pretty dope, I thought. Would definitely encourage people to look at that as an option on a game where you want super high mobility.
Question from Parth from 610. Would you prefer more assist-based gameplay where robots all have to work together, or traditional games where one team can carry? I mean, I think I like games where robots have to, like, I'd use the 2016 game or whichever the game with the gears was, 2017. I like that sort of thing where you needed 3 robots to hit the 4 rotors for the most part. And so I like that sort of thing. But I really want the teams to have to do a real task. 2014, by the way it degraded, like, yeah, I mean, it was pretty insulting to teams to be like, hey, we're going to put some elastic bands on your robot, and now we want to bounce a ball off of you and then stay out of the way. So I'm not a fan of that style. What do you guys think?
I'm definitely on the same page as you. I like teams that are able to, I like ones where you can't win by yourself. I don't like where one robot is able to carry. I think one robot should be able to carry in like a quals match, potentially with 2, like where at least you can be competitive by yourself, which is different than carrying, I guess. I think you should be able to be competitive by yourself, but I think you should need your alliance partners to win. Because I mean, you're on a 3-team alliance, like their alliances for a reason.
Yeah, I think the latest trend in games where there's enough offensive options that all 3 robots can contribute is really enjoyable to me. Like last year when somebody could be filling up the vault or putting cubes in the switch, or the year before where running gears didn't take a lot of mechanism power, so you had all 3 robots running gears, or the year before where everybody had to cross over the defenses to make sure you were getting all of your bonus points for crossing however many defenses you needed to. Those were all great. I loved them. But I do, like to change up the pace. It gets kind of old when the game is just like take object and score and goal, and it just looks the same. And there's a low goal and high goal. And last year, I think we got a really cool change of pace. And I hope we continue to get cool changes of pace every once in a while.
And one thing that I do really like is, like what you guys said, you don't obviously want one robot to just be able to dominate, but I do like the trend of assigning ranking points for sub-components of the game, where there's at least having one of the ranking points be something that a robot can kind of do on their own. Like, for example, in 2016, the shooting ranking point, one robot could do that in autonomous mode, and that was a super cool challenge. This year, with the triple lift, really what that came down to for some robots was, make sure you get your 3 for levitate, and then just have someone drive onto your forks and you can go up. I think I'm cool with rewarding excellence for one robot with just one of those ranking points there. And so that gives them the ability to kind of control their ranking to a certain degree, even if they don't have the partners they want, but at the same time, they're not going to be dominating on that. We got lots of questions here. You guys said that less friction is better for offensive robots. This is in terms of on your bumpers. And more friction is better for defensive robots. What are some viable ways you would get more friction as a defensive robot?
Yeah, I mean, your wheel choice is the number one thing. If you're just going to use off-the-shelf wheels, you got to be careful which ones you choose. The rough top, the blue tread is some of the best traction out there that I know of. Keep making sure the wheels are hard back, changing out your tread frequently so that you're not running on worn down tread, and making sure you're using all the allowed weight, keeping your weight low, keeping your bumpers as low as you can. All key strategies to be able to have more friction on the ground. There's also, if you're going to go with the drop center that has rock, that rocking motion can throw off your weight, and so you're not getting all your good traction, or at times you only have 2 wheels on the ground, so you're more likely to spin in place if you're a 6-wheel drive with a drop center. So going towards like an 8-wheel drive with a center forward drop will give you a more stable platform at all times, so you're less likely to get spun around. We've seen teams drop their wheels or get rid of their drops. So they have 8 in a line so that there's no way that they can turn. They can't turn themselves, so no one else can turn them either. Definitely some cool options off there. But I wouldn't say, just to go back to the root of the question, that less friction is always better for offensives. Like 3310 and Paul Kuglioli believe that less friction is better. And I think he's got something in certain games and certain situations, but I don't think it's the end all be all. And I don't think defensive bots always want more friction. I think when I showed Winovation playing defense, T-boning 67, I was trying to illustrate how having less friction up front and having those omni wheels up front was one of the better defensive robots in that game. So very much situation dependent. And it's hard to say there's one drivetrain that's the best, because if there was, we'd all have it, and frequently proven wrong.
But yeah, the other thing to think about there is, remember, there's 2 types of defense. If you want to, if you think you're going to be subject to a lot of positional defense, then the offensive robot, you kind of want to have a lot of traction, because you want to be able to plow through that robot, or possibly plow them into a protected zone to draw fouls. Like, that's a major thing. Parth from 610s in the chat, and they were the kings of that this year, of just drawing teams into fouls and shoving teams into the protected zone. So so it's definitely not a universal statement that less friction is better for offensive robots.
Okay, Karthik, I've got a question for you. FTC
Sure.
Live Ethan, he says, do you think T-boning would be an effective strategy in FTC or VEX?
So it's not as effective, and one of the biggest reasons for is the lack of bumpers. And so the metal on metal, it's much easier to slip out of. But I have seen teams get T-boned in VEX, but usually what happens in VEX, where it looks like a T-bone, isn't actually a T-bone. It's that the defending robot gets under the offensive robot a little bit and transfers some of their weight and transfers some of their normal force onto them. So then they have the absolute advantage in force right there to win that pushing battle. So typically T-bones don't work, but in VEX and in FTC, if you can get under your opponent a little bit and get them off the ground, that's going to win you that pushing battles. But again, I'm not too familiar with FTC game design these days, but I am, on the VRC side. Their games are generally designed such that defense usually isn't a winning strategy. So that's why you see a lot less of it. And also, a lot of it has to do with the size of the field and other factors.
Thank you to all of our co-executive producers, keeping fun loud, live, and independent. Pledge your support. Go to patreon.com/funfrc.